My name is Andy Ames, and I'm a board member of the Estes Valley Watershed Coalition. For those of you not familiar with the coalition, we were formed in 2013 after the flood to help coordinate restoration and resiliency projects. Some of those projects are still continuing today. Now, watersheds include much more than just waterways. It also includes the forests and habitat for all the inhabitants of the valley. And of course, that includes bears here in the Estes Valley. So Rachel and I have been involved with bear outreach for the last 10 years. We found that bears can find themselves in trouble when people don't understand their abilities and behavior. Hopefully this talk will go a long way in answering your questions, and that you will find black bears as fascinating as we do. So Rachel has a lot more experience with public speaking than I do, so I'll let her take it over from you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, as Andy said, we've been at this for about 10 years. We've been involved with the Colorado Bear Coalition, with the Estes Park Bear Education Task Force. We both wrote this talk, but I am the person giving it. So what we'll do is, if you have a quick clarifying question, go ahead and ask it. Just raise your hand. If you have something that's a little more general, then let's save that at the end, because as you might have heard me say, we have about an hour and a half of material to cover in an hour. So hopefully I'll go slow enough. Hopefully we'll be able to take a few breaks. But bears are really, really cool, and so we wanted to share as much as we could with you. So the first thing we want to do is, what are we talking about here? We're talking about the American black bear, and as you'll notice, the scientific name says Ursus americanus, which means that the black isn't part of the scientific name. But when settlers came early on, they saw a lot of black bears. They called it the American black bear. What they didn't realize until they explored further west is that bears can come in any color. They come in lots of different colors, like brown, cinnamon, blonde, even gray, and whatnot. About 50% of the bears in the western part of the United States are this lighter brown color. It's thought that the darker color helps them on the East Coast when they've got really, really heavy brush. Helps the coat's a little bit stronger. And bears out west don't have quite as much cover, and so it's thought that the lighter color helps keep them cooler. So bears can change their color, but it's not super common. They typically will bleach out, throughout the year, depending on what their coat is. Their height's about 3 to 3.5 feet, 4 to 5 when they're on all fours, 5 to 6 feet when they're standing. Their weight varies, 90 to 500, 600, 700, you'll hear it all. But Colorado bears are typically, a male would be like 275, a female 175. And in Estes Park, or in the Rocky Mountain National Park area, they've found to be lighter still, like 220 for the males and around 150 for the females. And we'll go through why that is a little bit later. But that's sort of the big theme. The Estes Park bears are different than Colorado bears, and they're real different than the rest of the bears in the United States. Cubs are like half a pound at birth. They might be 10 to 15 pounds in the early summer, and depending on the conditions, 15 to 160 pounds. That's all dependent on how much food they have. Maturity, females are generally ready to breed at around 4 to 5 years old. Males are ready to breed anytime, but most of them don't get to until they're about 7 or 8. They typically live about 10 years on average in the wild, but they can live a lot longer than that. Where might you find bears? So this is a very vague map. In fact, they're well into Maine and into New England. When they did a lot of deforestation in the east, when settlers first came, bears kind of ended up not having a lot of habitat. They're now resettling those areas. But you're generally going to find them in a mixed coniferous and deciduous forest, and they really need a variety of food. So as you probably know, bears get most of their calories in a couple months out of the year. And if they had a crop failure, they'd be in big trouble. So they need food sources that are available in early spring, in summer, in fall, and they need a variety. The most productive habitats tend to be moist meadows, aspen, think of aspen and deciduous tree groves, forest edges, because they need a way to get safe. And for a bear, getting safe means going up in a tree. Because bears weren't always the king of the roost. Way back, they had a lot of bigger predators, and it was found that it's believed that bears use their climbing abilities and hone their climbing abilities in order to get safe from bigger predators. They need a lot of dead and down trees. They need places to sort of hide. And they need abundance of soft mast. And soft mast, think fruits and berries. So chokecherries around here, Oregon grape. And they need abundant hard mast. Think acorns. So that's our first clue why the bears in Estes have a little bit of trouble, because we don't have these. There are lots of places in Colorado that do have acorns, gamble oaks. So think of this whole area, aspen down into here. This whole area is really great bear habitat, and Steamboat is fabulous bear habitat. So around here, bears are usually to the west. In the historic times, they were actually in almost the whole part of the state except the northeast. But now, they're where there's generally trees. CPW estimates around 20,000 bears, and they haven't changed their number in years. Who knows how many bears there are? But in 2007, there's a study, and we use a lot of the data from that study in this talk by Bender and Baldwin, and they estimated that the greater Rocky Mountain National Park area had 20 to 24 bears, minimum. But when you think that only about 40% of Rocky Mountain National Park is actually decent bear habitat, that number is probably actual. And so that's a really low number. That shows you that we've got something different here. And the different is we have a really short growing season. It's like 100 days. Like the settlers that came here, they even gave up on farming. We have really poor soils. We got almost an inch of rain yesterday, and I haven't seen a mud puddle yet. And we have really low rainfall. We have less than 20 inches in general. This year, we're at about 10. So, and we don't have that hard mass. We don't have acorns and nuts. And I don't know about you, but if I had to pick out all the seeds from a pine cone, like that would be a lot of work. So that's not really great food for bears. They can eat them, but it's not good. So the home ranges of a bear in the Estes Valley is anywhere 20 to 40 kilometers squared. So think sort of Lumpy Ridge to Chile and Fall River entrance to the dam. That's about 40 square miles. So you've got a lot of bears that are coming into this area that are all using this area. So it's not just one bear, say in Estes Valley, but they will use about that amount of square kilometers in order to find the food that they need throughout the year. And they'll definitely go up in elevation as things ripen, come back down depending on the season, maybe go up to hibernate, and we'll talk about that later. So in Estes, we have the lowest density, biggest home ranges of bears around. So let's go to black bear abilities. And what I forgot to tell you is that this talk is in 3 parts. First, we're going to talk about black bears in general. Then we're going to talk about the life of a bear in the Estes Valley. And then we're going to talk about how to coexist with bears. So we're now into abilities. We know how to identify one. We know how to find where they would be. There opportunistic omnivores. And for that, they need good eyesight. They've got great eyesight. It's about like ours. They can see color. They see way better than us at night. Their hearing is excellent. They can hear about like us and even lower registers, lower frequencies. They're really agile and strong, as we talked about. They climb trees. They're great swimmers. They're really fast. They have really sharp claws for digging, mainly digging in like trees and stuff like that. What they lack in dexterity in their hands, they make up with a really great tongue that is just made for taking a whole bunch of choke cherries off the vine. They're really intelligent. Their brain's really big compared to ours. They have excellent memories. They can generalize, so they know that if one house has this thing that feeds birds and has a bunch of seeds or sweets in it, they'll go and find the same thing at another house. They're really creative problem solvers. They're really efficient, and they make the most of their time and energy, and metabolic time and energy, and we'll go into that later. I'll explain this picture. We mentioned that Andy does bear sitting. This cub was in Boulder with its mom and sibling, and they were near the hill area, and so it got spooked, ran up a tree, and what CPW and volunteers like Andy do is they watch the bear and make sure that they try to get it to not come down during the day, because there's roads, there's kids, there's a chance that they could run into trouble. And so this bear was just hanging out, waiting for nightfall when the volunteers let it go back home. So, we didn't talk about the most important ability of a bear, and that is their sense of smell. And everybody talks about they're 7 times more than a bloodhound, and 100 times more than a person, and blah, blah, blah. Well, let's talk about their nose. They pretty much use their scent for everything. For food finding, for finding a mate, and for avoiding trouble. And so imagine that a person would have a pretty hard time surviving in the wilderness without their sight. We are sight-driven. And a bear would be really out of luck without its sense of smell. And so you can think about, okay, who cares how much better it is than ours? It's how they live their life. And their nose is a lot like a dog's. So what I want to point out here is all of you dog owners know that a dog has a little slit that goes like this. This bear was really close. It was walking down the street behind our house, and I had a really long lens, so this isn't very cropped. And this is that same sort of slit. And both the dog and a bear, when they inhale, the scent goes into an olfactory area, some percentage of it, and then the rest goes into their lungs. For us, let's take a little breather here. Breathe in for a second. Imagine you're breathing in a beautiful rose scent. Now breathe out. What happened to that scent? It went away. So we blow all the scent molecules out when we blow out. Bummer. That creates a strobe effect. So it's really hard for us to track something. A dog and a bear have the ability to breathe in, and then when they breathe out, they close a little place in their nose, and the air comes out that slit and actually create a vortex. So that they're able to continually draw in that air while sniffing, and they don't lose the scent. So that, I think, is just so cool. And it makes it so they are incredibly good at smelling. And bears are, bloodhounds are really good for tracking something. Bears are really good at long distance scent finding, because we talked about how big their home ranges are. How are you going to find each other if they're that far away? So they're really good at long distance smelling, and there's another thing.
Directional. So
And directional, and they can sort of get, smell, and breathe. So, so that I just thought was really cool, and what makes bears so great at smelling. So we talked about how great that their sense of smell is, and how that's how they communicate with each other. They do a lot of things like peeing and pooping and scratching on trees, and then they do this thing that I think is funny. A male will go and literally walk over a tree peeing on it. So the scent goes all the way up, right? If he bends the tree down, he's over the whole thing, the tree pops back up, and the scent is a giant flagpole saying, look here. So that's how they really communicate with each other, and they can also release scent with their feet. The stuff that we tend to see, we often think that it's them being aggressive towards us, whereas a lot of times they're communicating something like, oh my gosh, I'm really scared, or standing on the hind legs like, hey, let me see you a little bit clearer, or a bluff charge. They might just be trying to sort of test you out. They will swipe. If you get in their space, they're going to swipe, and they got those really long claws, so it could really hurt you, but it's not meant to be as aggressive, not like a grizzly bear. So they huff, like sometimes you'll hear them go, and that's literally them going, oh my God, I'm so scared. I can't believe I just survived that human walking by. So then they have some other ways to communicate when they're distressed or in pain. So that kind of gives you an overview of a bear. What we thought would be fun to do is go through a year in the life of a bear in Estes, and that year is really short. As we'll learn later, they hibernate for a good 6 months out of the year, and so their year begins kind of in spring. And let me get back to it. It begins in spring. You'll often see a few bear tracks in the snow. These lower ones, one other cool thing that I think is neat with bears is that their bigger digit is actually their pinky. So these are both right prints, right front prints. And if you think about it, when they're climbing, that pinky takes the most weight. And so it kind of looks like they're walking like this, but it's not. It's just that this digit is sort of the shorter, fatter one. So in March or April, the season of a bear, the year of a bear begins. These pictures were actually taken in about May, but you can see that they're kind of hanging around. This is a mom with 2 yearling cubs. They're kind of shedding their winter coat. They're kind of chill. They have been sleeping for 5 or 6 months. They emerge from hibernation. Males typically emerge first, then older males typically emerge first, then sort of younger males, females without cubs will emerge second, and then females with cubs will emerge last. They've lost about 20 to 30% of their weight because they haven't eaten for a long time. It's not really known what triggers them to exit hibernation, but hormones for sure. For the males, it's like, hey, time to get moving. Ambient temperature, it might start getting warm in their den. They might actually be hungry, and they might have flooding or den issues. So they come out. In the first couple weeks, they're pretty groggy, and they are in what's called walking hibernation. And they're still in a reduced metabolic state. They don't eat or drink much. They're still using their fat reserves, and they're really constipated. If you haven't eaten for 5 or 6 months, they regenerate their paws when they're hibernating, and so they might lick their paws, and so all those cells get in their digestive tract, and in fact, their digestive tract redevelops, and so a lot of cells are sloughed off there, and they might lick their fur, and they might groom themselves a little bit, and so they might get leaves and dirt and stuff like that, and so they've got all that stuff that's just been sitting. So for a couple weeks,
when they hibernate, are they in like a really deep sleep? I mean, if you came upon
we'll
the
talk
bear,
a ton about that. The answer is they're not knocked out. They're in between. But we'll talk more about that. That's a great question. So in this first couple weeks, they get rid of this fecal plug. And once their metabolism kicks in, they'd really like to go find their acorns. You know, bears out on the east or the north, you know, Minnesota, all these places where there's a ton of oak trees, they can scavenge on these and get some real calories in the spring. And bears around here, they're kind of hard up. So they scavenge on carrion, they are still losing weight, and they're definitely scoping out, like, where's the chokecherry bush going to be this year? Or, you know, where's the trash can going to be? Or stuff like that. So there's not a lot to do because there's only some grasses. You know, spring comes really late here. So bears, remember how we talked about how efficient they are? One of the really cool, efficient things they do is why not mate at this time of year? Got nothing else to do. So there's eating grasses. Deer and elk fawns are really important food sources for them. Those first couple weeks when the deer and elk fawns are just like hunkered down, they're really vulnerable. A bear could easily come across one and prey on one. The yearling cubs will disperse, and breeding adults will look for a mate. And so there's lots of roaming, lots of scent marking. Breeding males can travel a long ways to find a female, and they might lose 20% more weight during this time of year. Peak breeding time is June and July, which is kind of crazy to think that they're breeding at that time of year. Females will be in estrus the entire season, but they are considered to be induced ovulators, which means that only once she's found the male, and they mate a few times, will she actually release the egg. And that's just a really efficient way to do things. Why release an egg when it might not get fertilized? So they then do what's called diapause, which is that the cells, the egg will fertilize, and for a couple days, maybe 5 days, it'll develop, and then it pauses. And this is because it would be very costly for a bear to grow a fetus while she's trying to gain the weight she lost last winter. And in fact, if it's a bad food year, she might not have enough weight to carry the pregnancy. So everything gets paused, and based on how much weight she's able to gain over the fall, she'll either have 1 cub, 2 cubs, 3, or none. The eggs can get reabsorbed at that point.
I have another question about hibernation.
Ooh, later. We're going to go way into that later.
Okay, good. They aren't monogamous at all, so.
They are so promiscuous. It is very common for both sexes to mate with multiples, and for cubs to not be related. And that is a couple purposes. So we talked about how females only breed when they're like 5 or 6, and then they'll breed every other year. And so if a male comes upon a female with cubs, he might actually kill her cubs in order to get her back into estrus and be able to mate with her. So if she's able to mate with a lot of them, that kind of protects her cubs, because they might not know the cubs, but they might remember her. For sure they'll remember her, like, oh, she's the one I mated with last year. These cubs are okay. So it's definitely in her interest to mate with a bunch of them. and definitely stirs the gene pool up and makes it a very nice strategy for them. So now we're getting into about this time of year where this is called normal activity, and bears are typically active during the day, dawn and dusk. They don't like heat because they're kind of big and dark, and so they, that's why dawn and dusk are better. In human areas, they're going to switch their time a little bit more towards night because they want to avoid trouble. But you can often see signs of them, like these are really big rocks, like here, and then you'll see this log here. It used to be way over here. And then that looks like it's just been clawed open. They're typically eating 2,500 to 5,000 calories. They're starting basically to gain a little bit of weight at this time of year. And 30% of their diet is going to be social insect larvae. And you wonder, why social insect larvae? Well, social insects tend to breed in one big brood, and the larvae don't fly off. So it's easy for a bear to find some, dig it out. And they typically breed in like logs, old logs, under rocks. So they're going to eat that. And then the rest of their diet is going to be grasses, forbs. They'll eat bird eggs, rodents, carrion, anything that's edible, they're going to be eating. But this is their sort of normal time of year.
What's forbs?
Forbs is flowers.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, kind of cool that they, they'll eat, grasses, flowers, elk, deer, the old chipmunks, you name it.
Yeah, the forbs would be any like leafy vegetation.
So a mother with cubs, I should explain these. When Andy and I first moved up here, we were literally at a store looking at bear canisters. And on our trail camera was this mother taking a couple-hour nap with her babies. So we got a bunch of really cute pictures of this mother just hanging out in the shade. The cubs weigh 10 to 15 pounds at the beginning. They're going to gain around here up to about 45 pounds in the fall. She's still nursing them throughout the summer, but they definitely are eating solid food. They're weaned in August, September timeframe. They're learning sponges. They hang out with her a ton. She does leave them occasionally. If she has to go and really look for some food, she will go ahead and leave them. So it's not unheard of for her to leave them, but most of the time she'll bring them with her. And if there's danger, which Andy came across this mother and her two cubs, she will tell them, go find a tree, it's safe up there. And they, one of the ways that they learn, remember their smell is so incredible, is they'll smell her breath. And so that's how they learn, oh, this food is good to eat. Oh, that's edible. This is what I should be looking for. By July, right around now, all the way through November, food is finally abundant around here. And bears are going to need to gain about 50% of their weight in fat in order to hibernate. So a 100-pound bear would go to 150. That's just mind-boggling. And they're going to eat and drink 20 hours a day. Their appetite is completely insatiable. They literally cannot stop eating. And everybody says they eat up to 20,000 calories a day. And Andy and I spent weeks finding out where this came from. Because, who comes up with a number like that? And it turns out that bear.org, which is a group up in northern Minnesota, had a couple captive bears that they were able to monitor. And they said a captive bear with unlimited access to food and water can eat up to 15,000 to 20,000 calories a day and drink several gallons of water every day. So it doesn't mean that all bears are eating 20,000 calories a day. But if they had a smorgasbord or a buffet, they would definitely eat that. In the Estes Valley, the things that they're eating are like soft mass, like berries, or chokecherries, Oregon grape, raspberry, pinnick, grouse, whortleberry, bearberry, all those, and really not a whole lot of hard mast. So in the Estes Valley, Rocky Mountain National Park area, bears actually eat about 50% plant material and about 50% animal material. And that makes them very different than bears. Most of the time you hear the number, bears eat 90% plant material. Around here, we don't have enough calories of plant material. So they're going to eat chipmunks, mammals, squirrels, all sorts of.
Will they catch chipmunks and things?
They will catch chipmunks, and in fact, one thing that Andy and I learned about, that Ann Shunlau, if you know Ann Shunlau, she had a downspout that somebody had brought her, and apparently the chipmunk ran up the downspout, and the bear clamped it shut. And then was able to get the chipmunk. So talk about smart and resourceful and problem solving. They can definitely, you know, if it's edible, bear's going to eat it.
And as well as that animal-based food, a lot of that is the insects.
Yeah,
So
larval
it's not just mammals.
Yeah, I think it was 14% or so was larval insects. So here's a couple pictures of those, and this is a bear over by Sheep Lakes eating all those chokecherries on that hillside. So this is often what you see is this bear poop in fall with a ton of chokecherries in it. The one to the right is in Boulder, and that's apples. And what in 2017, Rocky Mountain National Park did a little study. They took a bear poop and they germinated it. And they found that over 1,200 seedlings, mostly of chokecherries and Oregon grape, germinated, which is just astonishing. I looked it up, and a chokecherry has about a calorie in it. So they were able to germinate about 1,300 or so calories out of the one bear poop. Now, what you don't see here is animal material, because animal material often gets hidden or completely digested. So you're just seeing sort of the output that didn't get absorbed. So the study people that did the 2007 study thought that there was about 5,000 calories represented in each bear poop. I don't know quite how they came up with that, but it gives you a sense that every time you see a bear poop, that bear's eaten quite a bit. And the coolest thing, I went down a little rabbit hole today. I've seen chipmunks eating non-ripe chokecherries, but I thought chokecherries were actually poisonous or toxic when they're not ripe. And it turns out that's true. The leaves of chokecherries and the pits are very toxic, and when they're not ripe, they're not really good either. But a chipmunk's digestive tract is really short, and so they actually expel the toxins before it accumulates. Same with the bear poop. They have a pretty short digestive tract, so these seeds can come in and out and not hurt the bear, even though they're kind of toxic. So kind of another fun little fact. Now we're going to get to the part where I think some of you are going to go, okay, this is a really big chart, but we're going to go through it slowly, and luckily we've got time. So when an animal is confronted with conditions where there's no food and harsh conditions, there is a mechanism called torpor, which is a lowering of metabolism, lowering of respiration, heart rate, and temperature, so that they can withstand those harsh conditions. And torpor is a real general term, and hummingbirds use torpor every night. Like the flowers aren't producing nectar, they don't see well at night, they just go into torpor, they sort of shut things down, and then they're able to make it through, even though they've got a really high metabolism during the day. And bats use torpor every day because bats have dark wings, which they overheat if they're trying to go hunting during the day. So they'd much rather sit out the day and then go hunting at night. And so they'll use torpor during the day. So a lot of animals use torpor, and that's the general term. What we think of as hibernation, or true hibernation, is what the chipmunks and marmots do. And what they do is they lower their body temperature, they lower their respiration, their heart rate, and in fact their body temperature goes so low it's just above ambient. And hopefully, if they've chosen a good den, that's above freezing. But tissues need blood, and so for them to drop their temperature that low risks losing limbs if they stay there too long. So every couple weeks, they do what's called an arousal, and they'll sort of shiver and shake, and they'll warm their body back up. And depending on the species, they might go take a snack, like chipmunks do. They might go pee or poop or whatever, or just roll over. But they do that every couple weeks throughout the hibernation period, and that way they're able to keep their limbs alive. And their metabolism slows, but it doesn't stop. But they can't reproduce. They're not making babies or anything like that. So if a bear did that, they're so big that it would take so much energy to get them back up to temperature that they would go through all their fat reserves in the first or second arousal. So it's much more efficient for a bear to just drop their body temperature by about 10 degrees. They still drop their respiration and heart rate by quite a bit, but because they're a little bit more awake, they can actually wake up if somebody comes and disturbs their den, and they can grow a fetus. So that's what makes bears a super hibernator. They drop their respiration, they drop their heart rate, but their temperature doesn't drop quite as much. They may stir occasionally. A pregnant female may go out and try to get a little bit more water if she's got access to snow. Might go for a little walkabout, but they're generally pretty lethargic. And that's how they're able to get through. Their digestive system almost stops. And that's why we talked about that fecal plug just gets stuck. They don't eat, drink, urinate, or defecate for the entire hibernation period. But a female delivers babies. And so, and she's able to, we'll go into that a little bit more in a minute, but she's able to continue nursing the cubs after they're born. And the bear is unique in that they can, well, not unique, but they're special in that their urea, instead of, normally you'd have a lot of toxins in your urea, which is your pee, and that would be really harmful for you, but bears are able to recycle that. And so they're able to reuse that, and that's how they are able to maintain themselves over hibernation. So we think that hormones, genes, daylight, and especially food availability triggers hibernation. Bears that are in warmer places where there's food will get lethargic, but they don't necessarily hibernate. A pregnant female will always den. But if a bear has access to food, they might stay awake. And in fact, that's kind of a problem in the Northeast, is that if they're fed too much trash, they just don't hibernate. They don't need to. It takes a couple of weeks for them to wind down their system. This is another bear that Andy hung out with in the Bear City. In Estes, bears will den between mid-October, late November. Their heart rate, as we talked about, will drop quite a bit, their respiration quite a bit, their metabolism will drop by 75%, but the temperature only drops like 10 to 12-ish degrees. They're insulin sensitive. During hyperphagia, they're insulin sensitive. So insulin tells your body to make fat. And so they make a ton of fat in that hyperphagia state. Once they go into hibernation, they're insulin insensitive, and that tells their body to utilize their fat. And so that's how they're able to stay alive. And fat is important here because fat has a ton of water. And so they're able to actually utilize that water when they're burning the fat. Without enough fat, they burn through muscle. And muscle takes water to metabolize or get energy out of. And so they can actually starve or dehydrate if they don't have enough fat. In Estes Valley area, den sites are typically steep. They're usually on north and east slopes. Usually around 10,000 feet, but they want consistent temperatures. They're like picas. They want to be in a little blanket of snow with really consistent temperatures. They don't want anyone bothering them. Around here, they're rocky areas. In the Elk Square, they can literally just crawl under a log or in a tree that's got a sort of hollow carved out area. Bears don't have collarbones, so they can literally fit in a medium-sized dog door. So it doesn't have to be big, but that's why they love your crawl space underneath your deck, like all those places that they might have access to. They can really be small areas, and so they'll go crawl in those spaces. If you happen to be pregnant and you're hibernating, that's when things get pretty amazing. This is another picture of that female with cubs. So if she hasn't gained enough weight, then she's not going to have babies. And that's nature's way of making sure that it protects the life of the mother above all else. Because if she doesn't make it, her cubs are definitely not making it. And this is a great way for bears to regulate their population numbers to the natural environment. So if there's a ton of food, you might have a lot of bears. If all of a sudden there's too many bears on the landscape, then they're a little bit too thin, not enough fat to have a lot of babies, they might reduce their numbers. Once the female is in hibernation around November, December, that blastocyst, that developing egg, fertilized egg, will implant. About 2 months later, she'll have her cubs, and it's really curious that she has cubs that are really immature. They don't have their eyes open, their ears aren't open, you know, they've only been 2 months developing. But to develop a fetus, you really need glucose. And it's really hard to make glucose from fat if you don't have oxygen. Any long-distance runner knows that you can't utilize your fat if you're sprinting and you don't have any oxygen. But remember, her respiration went down, so she's not breathing a whole lot. So it's far easier for her to deliver cubs that aren't quite mature yet. She then feeds them 25% milk fat, and they're not hibernating, and so they can convert that fat into glucose and develop. So I thought that was another really fascinating adaptation and explains why she would have such an undeveloped baby. And she might stir, but she basically is not involved in their caretaking those first couple months. Can you imagine waking up after, you know, a couple months and going, oh, look, I came into this den all by myself, and here are these little purring fur balls. So she does keep them warm. The cubs don't hibernate. She does clean up after them, and so she'll stimulate them to pee and poop, and she is able to recycle that nutrients, even though she herself does not eat or drink, defecate, or
So an example of how small those bears are, the bear cubs are when they're born, they're about half a pound. And so much smaller, so like a bear cub is about 1/200th of the weight of its mother, whereas with a human, it's about 1/20th the weight of its mother.
so super immature, but they're able to grow like weeds with her really fat-laden milk. So I thought that was really neat and amazing adaptation to make it through tough periods. So that kind of goes through the year in the life of the bear. So let's talk a little bit about living with bears. This is a bear that got us involved with bears. And this bear was a couple blocks from our house in Boulder. And what you can't see is that it's standing in a dumpster that was harboring medical waste. And so this bear had gloves and syringes and all sorts of stuff, but it was plowing through looking for food. I'm sure someone dropped their lunch in with all the other stuff. And we were pretty horrified, and there were a lot of bears that year, and that's when we realized that these trash ordinances, which Boulder then finally did, Estes Park did even before Boulder, are really, really important to keep bears safe. In Boulder, this is what we often see in the alleys, and a lot of people will say, oh, is a fed bear a dead bear? Like, is this bear doomed because it went in the trash once? And the answer is that bears don't really like to come into human areas, and if there's natural food, they will stay away. So it's only in bad food years, kind of like this year, that you need to be extra careful to not overpopulate the bears by feeding them, inadvertently or on purpose. Any bear that comes into a human area is doomed for a shorter life. They can get in accidents with vehicles, they can ingest hazardous materials, a lot of them will run up a power pole if they get scared and wind up electrocuted, and anytime they interact with humans, there's a possibility that they get in trouble. So it is important to remember that a fed bear isn't necessarily a dead bear, but you really need, the community needs to pitch in and make sure that these bears aren't accessing bad foods. And certainly a mother bear that teaches her cubs that it's safe to go into town is really setting her cubs up for a tough life, or early death. Now, probably most of you are old enough to remember when you used to have to put your hand in the door of a car and then push a button. You guys all remember that? Nowadays, all you have to do is put your hand in. And so bears, they're like, cool. We can just check every one of them. And in Yellowstone, or Yosemite or Yellowstone? Yellowstone. They did a study, and bears actually do select for minivans. Why? Because minivans often have food. And so you can have a clean car, but a bear will still check it out. It's your responsibility to lock your car, lock your windows, make sure that the windows are rolled up, because remember those claws? They can just pull on the window. This was someone who used to work at Watershed Coalition. He had one apple core in his car. He did not lock his car for one night. If the door goes and if it opens the door, the bear gets in and the door closes, there's no easy way for the bear to get out. And the bear panics. And so this bear pooped in his car and completely totaled the inside. They will completely rip open everything. So if you've got something that's important, like chickens or livestock or something that you don't want a bear to get into, the single most effective thing that you can have is electric fencing. And if you find that a bear is walking near your house, they make electric unwelcome mats that are really amazing. And that's a sensation that bears just don't like, and remember their memories, they never come back again. and test it. So electric fencing is really, really effective at keeping your things that they might see as food safe. So proper storage and security of foods. Most birds actually feed their babies insects in the summer. So there's really no reason to feed birds seeds in the summer. And what's really dangerous about anything, you can say, oh, I hang my feeders. They're not a problem. Well, if you hang them, the bear's still going to come by. So they're going to come by and they're going to say, oh, maybe I can't get to the feeder, but wow, there was a steak grilling here last night. Or there's a steak marinating in the house. Or look, this door's open. So anytime you attract a bear to your house, you're really asking for the bear to investigate further. And so keeping no pet food outside, no bird feeding, really keeping your house clean of attractants is the most important. And we've had fabulous luck with these flowers called Cuphea ignea. They're in the salvia family. Anything in the salvia family will really attract hummingbirds and not attract bears. And bird baths are really fantastic too. We find birds.
Rachel, what's the bird?
Junco. So juncos are seed eaters, right? But that's insects. It's feeding its baby insects because babies need protein. And so almost all of the seed-eating birds will switch to insects in the summertime.
And even as well as hummingbirds too, you'll see them looking for insects. You'll see them like you see them in the air going like this. They're just picking up little insects. Yeah, you'll see that sometimes along roads or behind houses, and they'll bring that back to their young.
So that leads us to here. You can see a mom and a cub, and this is that the one that was lounging around that sprig. These are some great resources. The state has now partnered with BearWise to do all of their bear education outreach. You can sign up for their email, and they have really, really excellent information. North American Bear Center has some great stuff. Bear Smart Durango has done a lot because they've got a really high population of bears there. Bears and People, and Barrier Solutions has that unwelcome map. CPW has some great sites, and also the Baldwin and Bender report is what we relied on for this. So hopefully I've answered your hibernation questions, but we actually have 7 minutes for questions. Does anybody have anything?
For some reason, my eye is always drawn to chokecherries as I'm out and about. I'm in the park almost every day, and I've never seen such a lack of chokecherries as I have this year.
Now, in Boulder, we have a chokecherry bush, and some years the chokecherries will go all the way until November until somebody picks them up. And this year the robins have gotten them all already.
I noticed that today downtown at Brigade.
So the robins, and I've seen the robins eating the wax currants as well. So I have a feeling that our lack of moisture created lack of insects, which means all the birds that normally would eat worms and other insects are the ones that can are going to the cherries. And so the bears, if they don't hurry up, they're going to be out of luck.
Plus, you said chipmunks eat them when they're green.
I've seen ground squirrels and chipmunks both eating them.
I thought maybe insects, but I wonder if it's squirrels or chipmunks.
And one of the reasons that bears need a variety is for that, crop insurance, basically. And a lot of times what will happen is that, let's say there's a freeze at 8,000 feet, but there's not a freeze or things haven't flowered at 8,500. Then bears can go up or down. So that apple tree at Fall River that normally has apples, I think it got caught in the freeze. But maybe, a little higher or a little lower. So that's where bears end up having to travel quite a bit to find stuff. But it's going to be a tough food year. I mean, just the lack of moisture alone. And this is the 3rd year of lack of moisture. So tough year.
Not many cubs.
And there's a little delay, so there might not be many cubs next year. And in fact, sometimes if there's a really bad crop year, all the bears that were pregnant reabsorb their fetuses or eggs, and they won't have babies. So then there'll be a banner year the following year because all of them were receptive that next year. So there can be sort of cycles of bears, but in general their biology really keeps them pretty well tailored to the environment, unless we go in and we feed them and mess that up. Anything, yeah?
Around my house, there's some bears coming around that they have tags on their ears, and we've seen some with just one, and a couple times we've seen two, and I'm not sure what that means. Do you?
So CPW has what's called a 2-strike, and that means that they will handle a bear once. So if a bear, let's say a bear got into a swimming pool and got caught, or bear got into some trouble that they ended up having to tranquilize it and maybe relocate it. That's 1 strike, and it gets a tag. That means that bear has been handled. And if that bear gets into trouble again, CPW thinks that it's more prudent to euthanize that bear and not try again to save it. So some cubs, if their moms, they get orphaned and maybe they get rehabbed someplace, they'll have a tag. But if they end up getting into trouble again, and Andy's got some stats on that.
I don't have them with me. Relocating bears is not a recipe for success, because their tendency, there's a couple of issues. The one is that wherever they get moved to is the home range of another bear. And so it may not be a friendly environment, or there may not be food enough for another bear in that habitat. And bears also have an incredible instinct to return to home. And so even if they're moved 50 miles away, they can return home in a matter of days. And often that includes crossing a number of roadways, so they're moving through unfamiliar habitat territories of other animals, so it's really dangerous, and they can end up being killed by cars or other animals. Plus they're in an environment that they're not familiar with. And then so male bears tend to be relocated more often, and but actually a lot of bears do find success. Some end up being caught in hunting because they may be moved from an area with no hunting to an area with hunting. But
it wasn't a huge number that have been killed for
right.
the 2 strike.
So, yeah,
it's not horrible, but
yeah, a lot of them just never are heard of again, which could mean that was a great success. Could mean that it wasn't. We just don't know what happened to that animal. But it's not a preferred solution. Now, not every bear that has a tag is going to have that mortal fate on that second time. It can depend on why it was relocated the first time. If it was because it was a nuisance bear, that would be probably a recipe that it would mean that it's going to be euthanized. If it just happened to be like in the wrong place, it was in an unsafe location, it may be moved, and then it gives that, since those tags have numbers on it, they can know why it was got in trouble or what happened to it previously.
So if people are interested in that, there's a book called Bear in the Back Seats, which is actually really funny, but it's the story after a ranger from Smoky Mountain National Park wrote this book, and that was his thing, was bears.
Oh, what?
And it's so funny, you know, he talks about all the things that they tried to do to get bears at campgrounds, different things. But he talks about the challenge with that too. Like they would transport bears across state, and they'd show back. They're like, what are we doing? We don't know. So it's a really good book. It's very informative, but funny at the same time.
Yes, that does.
Yeah, it used to be that bears, if they're moved, they have to stay in that same wildlife unit. So, which can reduce, needs that they can't be moved that far. This year, they're allowing them to move further. So like a bear from Boulder could be moved all the way up to the Wyoming border. A bear in Estes Park is not as likely to be relocated because this is already good. It's relatively good bear habitat. So, no matter where it is in town, it's only a block from open space or wildland. Whereas a bear, like in a more urban area, if it could end up like on a CU campus or something, that's a really dangerous situation for that bear. So it might be a reason to relocate that one.
And no community wants a bear that, oh, the bear got in my trash, here, go take it. Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't work. So we're almost out of time, maybe one or two quick questions. I hope you've learned something. Did everyone learn something? If you want to come, here's the info on some other talks, and then don't forget that we have pine cone and pine needle pickups the same days that the ELSA has their wheat drop-offs. They do need to be in separate bags, and you can check out our website for more information. But we really appreciate your support, and I'm really glad you guys came.
You can also follow us on Facebook. We try to do like wildlife information, wildlife Wednesdays, where you can learn about the wildlife area. Yeah.
Using the